how much of history do you think can shape or help the future?
Well, I think on the Middle East issues, that's pretty in our face right now. The larger incident tells us that these events that seem far away, they're not really. If there's anger, widespread anger about Gaza, they will target people who are close to America, close to Israel. In our countries around us, they're not bombing, but they are boycotting. KFC, they might say, what's going to do with us, But they are doing that. Could they strike Singapore? Boycott or bombs? I don't think we should be any under the illusion that we somehow have this protective shield over us. Problems can emerge from other things too. Issues that concern my father, his generation, was communism. Not today, but hard right, potential China, Russia, that kind of influence. Not that China is evil, as we used to think in the communist days, but we want to decide things for ourselves. I mean, as a people, as our own independent republic that was created in my father's time. I think we should embrace that sense of sovereignty that we're deciding. Whichever way we decide, we're deciding. So I think those concerns continue. There are also always dangers about fractures within our society. One of the things that the book writes about, which is quite perhaps controversial, is how my father played a role in handling the unions which are very on the left. Easy to call them communists, but I think, if you look at the poor conditions of the workers in those days, it was very ripe for that kind of dissent. And then you either reform it, as the PP tried to do. So Lee Kuan Yew represented them as opposition. Government, he raised their salaries, made the conditions better. My father was part of that process. It wasn't all like whack them with batons, but making those workers understand how the tripartism works. That was part of that process.
With your work, you do have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the region and internationally as well. Where do you see the next 5-10 years in terms of the geopolitics of this region and all the
I think it's going to get
flashpoints?
tougher. The South American tensions have come on to the point of competition, almost conflict. That's not going to go away. The Ukraine and Gaza situations are also not gone. In fact, as they go longer, you mustn't get the attitude that people just say, well, it doesn't matter. It matters. It can boil over and it can really infest, become like an infected wound. It doesn't get better. It gets worse. And I think part of that infection is that the system of rules of law that people can deal with China and America, all the things my generation grew up accepting as the norm. We understand now that this wasn't the norm in the 60s and 70s, the Cold War, and it's increasingly not the norm now and in 5 years' time. The things I see America do about, say, Huawei and requiring that ByteDance sell. America of the 90s would have said, what are you, communist? It's just hard to imagine. And so even 4 to 5 years can be hard to predict. I do work a lot on these issues, but if you ask me 5 years ago, would there be a global pandemic? I think we were all caught a bit unawares.
Yeah. But these sort of things, do they point towards a shift in the mindset of the leaders?
Well, I can't say that I know all the leaders, but certainly every country now is talking more about their constituency, not just their countrymen, but their particular constituency. So, like say, you look at America, Donald Trump is talking to his hardcore followers. He's talking about American people, let alone the world. He's the president of actually that hardcore. And if he wins again, probably govern from that core rather than for the country, let alone the system, the world system. So the creating of what political scientists call the global commons that's not being built anymore. It's probably being eroded. It's being also kind of shifted to rules favoring one side. So you see a lot of hypocrisy. People saying, oh, the rules favor me when they favor me, and when the rules don't, they shut up about it. Right? I think that's going to be very infectious about how each country behaves. Because if America is free to do that, then so is the next country or the next country, until you get to right down to everybody. And in that kind of dangerous, lawless world, I think that what is going to help us is a sense of a foundation, resilience, certain attitudes. I'm not saying all these came from your grandmother's milk, but there are certain foundational ideas of Singapore that Singapore should try. One of them to be relevant. One of the periods that my father covered was our effort to become internationally known. 1971, something today considered obscure, the Commonwealth Heads of Government, was a big thing in Singapore. First big international conference. First time Commonwealth was held outside of UK. In that same period, they were courting America. Lee Kuan Yew spent a sabbatical in America, said, the British are leaving. British had bases in Singapore in 1971. The British are leaving. You want their bases? They didn't, because they had bases in Thailand, they had bases in the Philippines. But that relationship with America, the system that America grew, started from that period. We're going through a major shift. We hopefully will have the next generation of leaders, and Lee Hsien Loong has built a good reputation with China too. And we can make that transition to a much more difficult world.
It's also becoming a more complex world, right? I mean, I think the whole internet and that whole space that has come up, and cyber issues and various things, the threats are not physical, like somebody's going to blow you up. I mean, they could invade you through your network, through your system, could cripple you in that way as well. So how do you think your father would have managed today?
You're making me talk about fiction.
Since that's part of the book, right?
If I look, maybe my father, look back at the history, one of the lessons will be about what they call United Front tactics. The communists did it, and other people play the same thing today, using social media, cyber attacks, a whole bunch of gray zone efforts. Direct conflict, a bit more guarded, but this other warfare by other means, I think, will be part of the feature of the system coming about. And so we go back to fundamentals. Besides the technology and other things we can do, we go back to fundamentals. Is there trust? Do the people of Singapore feel the government's got their back? We are under the system where we really are depending on critical leaders doing it at the right time. Now, that has happened in the past. Certain calls were made in the pioneer generation, which, thank goodness, they made them. Some of them were very individual, fly by the seat of their pants. They had very few SOPs in those days. They had to make things up. Now, I'm not saying that the task for the 4G and Lawrence Wong is that hard, because everything that's been done since the 70s has kind of built that foundation up to like a skyscraper here. If the current generation, next generation, can stand on the top of that skyscraper and look out, they have a much better view than from the mud flats that Lee Kuan Yew talked about in the 60s. So I think that Singapore has done very well. Of course, there will be envy. There can be targeting of us. People want to take us down. But without being paranoid, we can also leverage that strength to offer partnerships to different players. I mean, one reason I think we, more than any other country in Southeast Asia, except maybe Indonesia, can play both China and America, is because we've got value to both sides.
You talk about the skyscraper perspective, but sometimes if you're too high up, you don't see the detail on the ground as well.
Yes.
And you do need that too. And the thing with SOPs, do you then tend to fall back on your SOPs as a safety net instead of maybe doing some fly by the seat of your pants decision making, which may make the difference?
Yeah. Well, I think that's where I think our generation and the one coming next have that balance to play. Not balance, sometimes figure out which one is the right move. I mean, if we're ignorant of the past, we make mistakes that we didn't have to, right? The tuition money is already been paid. Like Laju, my father, because of his decade-long involvement in intelligence, had all the right people to call. They now have a command structure, where the successor of his job, Permsec of Home Affairs, he's officially in charge. Whereas in those days, my father was advising Lee Kuan Yew on various issues. Lee Kuan Yew said, "You're running it," he ran it. So the system settles some questions, but then the individual system have to realize that the system won't solve everything. So you're right. There needs to be gumption. There needs to be that pioneering spirit. Now I'm saying like some National Day rally speech, right? But it's fundamentally true. That sense of resilience, that sense of ingenuity and risk-taking, we mustn't lose that. Because what's the analogy? Singapore is small, nimble, trusted, lots of different things, but we're not big. We can't take 2 or 3 hits. We can't have lots of passengers on the ship. We've got to have an active crew led by a good captain and leadership.